The New Orleans Saints dynamic trio of wide receivers is set, and it's so good that if it has to be a dynamic duo, they'll still win games. We got all of that and a little bit of lanyard for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And of course, you can continue the conversation with me one-on-one over at joinsubtext.com/LockedOn Saints. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site, covering the New Orleans Saints, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, it's Friday, so it's In Case You Missed It Day, so we'll get you caught up on all the biggest stories from around the New Orleans Saints this week. We'll also see some video clips, myself kind of going back and forth with Alontae Taylor, talking about his adjustments in learning a little bit about the slot in terms of his cross-training. We're also going to hear from Dennis Allen on Jon Gruden and get you caught up from some of the biggest stories from this week for the Saints. But first, I want to start off with the New Orleans Saints dynamic trio at wide receiver, which is set. Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed. The New Orleans Saints, who brought in a new quarterback this offseason in Derek Carr, have absolutely built an offense that has the skill position players on paper that should be able to help to support their new quarterback. Now, they've also helped out the quarterback with tight ends, re-signing Juwan Johnson, bringing in Foster Moreau, potentially a couple of other additions that are going to that could potentially contribute there as well. Sounded like Porky Pig there for a minute. And then, of course, at the running back spot, not only do you have Alvin Kamara, but Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller, all of that. So the Saints have done a wonderful job in terms of putting together the roster when it comes to skill position players. Now, what do these guys all look like on the field? That remains to be seen. But in terms of what the Saints have done at wide receiver, they're in a really, really good place. And the thing that I like about what they've done is that they didn't sit back and say, okay, job's done. Got three great wide receivers. Michael Thomas is probably going to be healthy all season. We're just going to bank on that and everything's going to be great. No, they didn't do that. They went out and they got Bryan Edwards. They went out and they got James Washington. They went out, they drafted A.T. Perry. They signed Shaq Davis. There's a bunch of different ways that the Saints have shown you that, okay, they want to be safeguarded just in case things don't fully work out. I mean, Michael Thomas has played only 10 games in the last 3 seasons. So to expect him to play more than 10 games in a single season is a lot of confidence. And you have to have a lot of confidence around all of that. But you also have to be prepared just in case that's not the case. And we would hate to see that from Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas would hate that. He wants to be out on the field. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But the good news for New Orleans, at least, is that even if they end up having to be without Michael Thomas for a stretch of games, a single game, a play, whatever it might be, they're still in a really good position with their dynamic duo of Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Both wide receivers had the goal over the course of the offseason to get bigger, to bulk up a bit. I spoke with Chris Olave off camera and asked him a little bit about his playing weight and how things were going for him over the course of the offseason. He finished last season listed on the New Orleans Saints website at around 187 pounds, but now he's up to 192. He said he's not fully finished yet. He's still trying to get a little bit more there, but not really trying to get into the 200 range. And it seems that that's also a goal for his fellow wide receiver in complement in Rashid Shaheed. Here's a little bit about what Rashid Shaheed said he wants to do to improve over the course of this offseason.
I would say just getting bigger, faster, stronger, and also my knowledge of the game. I feel like I can improve a lot, and that's going to come with, film study and getting with my quarterbacks and, breaking down film and just getting on the same page.
So you heard him say bigger, faster, stronger, bigger, better, stronger. And he's already fast. He's got the speed. So Mike Triplett followed up on that question from over at NewOrleans.football and asked, what is he playing at or what is he hoping to play at over the course of this season? And so his season playing weight that he has a desire to be at is going to be 185 pounds was the answer that he gave. I'm pulling up where he's at right now because I completely forgot to pull that up before. So peek behind the curtain at how weird Ross can be sometimes. So he was at 180 pounds listed on the team's website there. So we're talking about a difference of 5 pounds for both of these guys. which might not sound like a lot, but if you're able to put on 5 pounds of bulk, if you're able to put on 5 pounds of muscle that complements strength without surrendering your speed, that's still a better place to be than you were before. And it has a larger impact that I think we would think off the top of our heads. Oh, how big of a deal is 5 pounds? Well, I think the better question is, how big of a deal is it to not be 5 pounds lighter? I think that's really the way to look at this. Any amount of weight and strength and power that these guys can put on while maintaining their speed, agility, quickness, that's a win for both of them. And to see that both of them have had that realization, have been in a situation where they've gone, Rashid Shaheed even said at one point later on in that conversation that being in the NFL and being a small guy, you can't take hits. And so he's wanting to bulk up so that he'll be able to do that. And I think that shows in terms of what it is that he has shown so far during OTAs, is that he's not just a deep threat. And here's where the idea of having that weight added, being bigger, being stronger, ends up having a larger impact, is that I think sometimes we think about Rashid Shaheed just in terms of what he can do down the field. But we're also watching him at OTAs running these crossing routes, running digs, running comebacks, running curls, doing all of these things that are going to put him in situations where he's going to get hit and catch the ball over the middle of the field, and potentially see him get a lot more work in the slot this offseason. If the Saints don't address that position, you're going to see a lot of mixing and matching between him, Chris Olave, and Michael Thomas all taking slot snaps. And so because of that, you're going to have to fight through traffic. You're going to have to be able to weave in and out of, on-comers, on-lookers, all those other things, and take some hits over the middle every now and then as well, and not put the ball on the ground. And that becomes such a big, big, big benefit of putting on that strength, putting on that power, putting on that weight and that bulk, is that it helps you be able to get that done. And trust me, Rashid Shaheed is no slower. And he is only just as fast as he was last year. And we've seen it already out on the field. And so you add that weight, you add that bulk, you continue to build the responsibilities. And every time you talk to Rashid Shaheed, one of the things he always talks about is the mental side of the game. Film study, understanding the playbook, learning it, being able to actually answer questions for some of the young guys now. And he's only a year in. And remember, he's a year in and didn't get a full season last year. He only played in like 10 games or something like that last year. And so you look at where he is and how I think it was exactly 10 games. He had 407 yards, it was 40.7 yards per game. And so that's a weird way to remember how many games he had. But anyway, so if you take that, and if he's able to do exactly what he did last year on a 17-game basis, then he's teasing 700 yards. And that's not and that's just receiving. That's not including what he's also been able to do as a jet sweep guy, as what they might look to do with him on the reverse game and screen game and all these other things, some stuff that might count towards his rushing totals as opposed to his passing or receiving totals. And so there's all of these different ways now that New Orleans is probably going to be able to utilize him if the 3 wide receivers can stay healthy. And so that dynamic trio of Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Rashid Shaheed, if they get double-digit games out of those guys, all 3 of them on the field, and it doesn't turn into a New Orleans Saints secondary of 2022, who the intended starting 5 never took a single snap together all season, if that doesn't happen with these 3 guys at wide receiver on the offensive side, that's huge for New Orleans, and even bigger for Derek Carr. And I just want to mention, too, Rashid Shaheed also had his comments on Derek Carr as well. And one of the things that he mentioned was that he can put the ball anywhere. So the idea of expanding the route tree, growing a little bit more in terms of the distribution of where these players are and what routes they run and how they're deployed and what concepts are utilized, maybe that opportunity becomes a lot more expanded now that you've got a second year or another full off, or really Rashid Shaheed's first full offseason, because remember, he was still rehabbing his knee last year at this point and through the majority of training camp. And so you get a full offseason for Rashid Shaheed. You get a second year for Chris Olave. Hopefully you get a healthy Michael Thomas. And now all of a sudden you add on top of that the ability to be able to attack more layers, more areas of the field than you were able to with Andy Dalton, not being able to get Jameis Winston out on the field. Then all of a sudden, this changes your entire offense. And a big part of how the New Orleans Saints wanted to change their offense is not only incorporating and continuing to evolve their version of Sean Payton's system, but reincorporating some things from 2011, reincorporating some things from 2009, and bringing some things that are familiar for Derek Carr. That's why the Jon Gruden visit and consultation happened. And although it did spark a little bit of backlash from some media as well as fans, it doesn't seem that the Saints are too bothered by it at all and feel that it will have a bit of a benefit and potentially move the needle a bit for their offense. We'll hear what Dennis Allen had to say about the visit, why it happened, and how he feels that it will benefit the team as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook, and of course our official sportsbook partner here at the Locked On Podcast Network, and over with the NFL as well. So if you want to get in on some of those New Orleans Saints odds, FanDuel is absolutely the place to do it. And if you're a first-time user of FanDuel, you're going to be able to get a no-sweat first bet of up to $2,500. That is a lot of bucks. That's bonus bets that come back to you if your first bet doesn't win, which means you're effectively safeguarded on that first bet. So go crazy. You want to bet for the New Orleans Saints to win the conference? Go for it. You want to bet for the New Orleans Saints to win the Super Bowl? Go for it. Or maybe you just want to bet on the division, or maybe the first game, Derek Carr over 4,500 passing yards, under 4,500 passing yards, whatever your very, very, very first bet is with FanDuel as a new customer. If you head over to FanDuel.com/locked-on, you're going to be able to get that no sweat first bet of up to $2,500 in bonus bets if that first bet doesn't win. So go check them out today. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/locked-on to qualify for the no sweat first bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Dennis Allen spoke to New Orleans media after the second practice that media was present for on Tuesday when it came to OTAs. And he was asked specifically around Jon Gruden or about Jon Gruden, the visit, all of those things. So we're going to look at that as well as get you caught up on all of the biggest stories from around the New Orleans Saints from this week. Appreciate you as always being Locked On Saints, your first listen of the day, every day, to all the everydayers out there. We'll be back with you on Monday as we preview what we want to learn from the offense for the third practice that Saints media will be available for and present for when it comes to OTAs. Just a heads up, I will not be in town for mandatory mini camps, but I'll make sure that we have a guest that can come through to help us get all of the observations and things like that. It'll probably be John Hendricks from over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation with me. So we'll be taking a look at that as well during mini camps, but that's in the middle of June. But just as an early heads up for folks. So I want to take a look now at Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen was asked about the Jon Gruden visit. This was from Kat Terrell over at ESPN. Great question just around why the New Orleans Saints brought in Jon Gruden, what they feel like the benefit is or what the impact is. And so let's first, before we kind of dive into this, as I've made sort of my position and stance on this pretty clear, let's hear from the other perspective of this, from the organization, from the team, about why they felt that this would be beneficial.
Number one, we've had several coaches come and visit. Obviously, John's a guy that has a lot of experience with Derek, and Derek's had his most success under Jon Gruden. And so we felt like bringing him in, having a chance to sit down and visit with him as an offensive staff, with quarterbacks, and just get some new thoughts and ideas, things that we might be able to implement. I would say this. I would say, offensively for a long time that I've been here, we've been pretty effective offensively, and so I don't see us putting in a whole new offense or doing something dramatic. But if there's a few ideas that we could take from that, we felt like that would be beneficial.
So the idea is basically he comes in, he consults, he meets with the offensive staff, he meets with the quarterbacks, things like that. And then if there's something that the Saints want to incorporate, then they will incorporate it. But just so you know, Kat followed this up with the question around, are you concerned about backlash? And basically Dennis Allen was like, effectively said no, like not really worried about the backlash. Look, we're going to do whatever it takes to, give us an edge and see what we can do. So it was very like football based for Dennis Allen and for the New Orleans Saints. And no surprise in terms of like that being the approach at all. That's the approach that they would more than likely take, or that any NFL franchise would take in that situation. And so the benefit of bringing in a Jon Gruden is that you get somebody in who can give you some feedback in terms of how they helped to create a very successful Derek Carr, and you're looking to create a very successful Derek Carr. So bam, bam, there's your overlap. And, there were other guys that they could have gone to, or there weren't other guys that they could have gone to, is what I mean to say, because you look at quarterbacks, coaches, as well as previous offensive coordinators. You can't bring any of those guys in. You can't bring Sean Payton back because he's the Denver Broncos head coach to help you look over your previous offense. You can't bring Tom Condon in. He's busy across the country. So Jon Gruden was the guy that they brought in. And as much as I do think that there's controversy there, or not controversy, but certainly conflict there and everything for the Saints, it's not like they're employing him. It's not like they're giving him a new job. It's not like they're saying, okay, here you go, welcome back to the NFL or whatever. And it's, can they find a way to benefit off of this? So then that becomes the next piece to it all, is can you find a way to benefit off of all of this and make sure that this is worth your while? So we'll just kind of have to wait and see. Is there something that we see from this New Orleans Saints offense at any point in 2023 that they go, yeah, that happened because we brought in Jon Gruden and he gave, a pretty good piece here, and that was the thing that we utilized. So I could see them moving a portion of that Las Vegas Raiders playbook in and maybe adding some pieces to their offense. But as Dennis Allen said, they feel that their offense is more than adequate, so don't expect a big-time overhaul in Jon Gruden's vision just because he showed up for like 3 days. So that's the way that, I'd still look at this the same way. Was it worth bringing him in if you're not really going to take too much from it? And maybe it is, maybe it won't be. All right, let's get to In Case You Missed It. That was kind of an In Case You Missed It for you too, that the Saints brought in Jon Gruden as a consult to help with the offensive transition to Derek Carr. Basically, the three pillars of that are maintaining the things that they want to do differently and evolving Sean Payton's system into their own system, bringing back some things from previous, more Drew Breesian 2011, earlier portions of the offense, but then also incorporating some concepts, schemes, systems, things like that Derek Carr is familiar with from his Raiders days. Also, in case you missed it, the Saints made two big signings, and they waived one person as well. They waived kicker Alex Caveda. They brought in tight end Jesse James, as well as fullback Jake Bargas as well. So the Saints keeping the fullback position alive. You know that we love that here on Locked On Saints, and in continuing to add to their tight end room. The tight end room is getting a little curious, getting a little question marky, and all, not because it's unstable or anything like that, or because it's not good enough or anything like that. It's just, you're kind of just looking at the numbers now. You've got Juwan Johnson, you've got Foster Moreau, you've got Lucas Krull. All three of those guys are participating at OTAs, but Miller Forrestall has not been able to participate just yet, and Taysom Hill has not been present. So they bring in Jesse James, and maybe that just gives you a fourth body to get involved a little bit more, since all three of those top tight ends otherwise are taking those first team reps. You want some guys for second, third teams, and without overworking the tight ends, and especially with the way that Saints use like zebra technologies and stuff like that to make sure that they're not overworking players and that they're keeping them safe. Maybe Jesse James factors into that. But I got to tell you, I wouldn't shake a stick at this guy. I wouldn't dismiss this guy as somebody that could potentially win a roster spot or end up as a vet on the practice squad. Either way would actually be pretty good for New Orleans. The Saints and Texans are going to hold joint practices here in New Orleans ahead of their preseason games. The Saints will hold joint practices for two different teams. They'll hold joint practices with the Chargers in, it'll be in, I'll just call it Southern California, because they'll play in they play in Los Angeles, but then they'll practice down in Orange County and Costa Mesa. So they'll be in Southern California for that week, and then they'll come back here, and then they'll host the Texans here. So that's great, because the Saints will get a little bit more of those sort of unfamiliar faces, unfamiliar pass rushing attacks, unfamiliar, moves from some of these other guys that they're not practicing against every single day. And that adds a lot of benefit. We saw how much the team across the roster loved the joint practices last year with Green Bay. Now they get to do it twice with two different teams this offseason. So that's going to be really, really nice. The Saints on Thursday, this is really cool, inducted Jabari Greer into the Saints Hall of Fame. Spent 5 years with the New Orleans Saints. Unfortunately, it was huge for them during their Super Bowl run in 2009. He had a really stellar season throughout most, and he had an injury that knocked him out that year, but then he came back for this playoff run, broke up like 3 passes during that time, had 8 tackles in the Super Bowl. He was a huge part of what they did. I think he also returned an interception for a touchdown that year. He had 2 picks that season. And so not in the postseason, but during the regular season. And, played 63 games with the New Orleans Saints and broke up 68 passes. So he was breaking up at least a pass a game in terms of on average, or more than a pass a game on average. So really cool to see Jabari Greer get his flowers there. He had that ACL injury at the end of 2013, if I recall correctly. And then he announced his retirement that next offseason after 10 full years in the NFL, but 5 with the New Orleans Saints. So really, really cool. It's a great story, and Jabari Greer absolutely deserves this. So welcome to the Hall, Jabari. That's awesome. And the last piece I want to mention here is Kirk Merritt. Kirk Merritt, the Destrehan native, who is formerly a wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints, maybe making a move to running back. I spoke with Joel Thomas one-on-one during or following OTA practice on Tuesday, and he told me that Kirk Merritt has spent the entire offseason as well as OTAs in the running back room with him as opposed to with the wide receivers. And this is a transition that the Saints kind of teased and played around with during training camp last year. But now, especially with Alvin Kamara not present for OTAs, Kendre Miller not able to participate, Benjamin not able to participate, getting Kirk Merritt in that running back room and allowing him to be able to be a part of what they're doing is great. And so we'll see what happens with Kirk Merritt. Maybe he gets a little bit of a Ty Montgomery role, whether that's on the active roster or practice squad, where he holds one roster spot, but it gives you depth in two different places. Plus, don't forget, he's also a good special teams contributor, had that 59-yard kick return against the Green Bay Packers in last year's preseason as well. The other piece of news for you is that Alontae Taylor has been getting run in the slot. So coming up next, you're going to hear a little bit of my back and forth with Alontae during his media availability. I've got 4 question and answers that he and I toss back and forth with one another that kind of give you a little bit of a glimpse into why the nickel thing is happening. His first impressions of Joe Woods, a little bit of talk on that swagger, handshakes, dancing stuff that Dennis Allen wants, and then, of course, what it is that are the hurdles for him as he's learning his new position. We'll wrap up the show with that as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. We're going to do something a little bit different today, a way that I've never really done this before. If you hate it, please tell me. But what I'm going to do here is I'm just really going to play a back and forth. It's about 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes of Alontae Taylor and I asked like 4 questions during his media availability. And I thought it would be interesting to just kind of roll some of those things so that you kind of have the full context of my questions as well as his answers and things like that. And the focus was early on his sort of not transition, because he's not changing positions. He's just kind of cross-training, but cross-training in the nickel. What are some of the hurdles that he has? What are some of the things that he has to, change or that he has to learn that's new? And the challenges that are presented with moving from the outside to the inside. But then I also spoke with him about the coaching staff and things like that, and the representation on the coaching staff of secondary coaches. You're going to hear him reference M-Rob. That's Marcus Robertson, the new defensive backs coach that the Saints brought in, who was like pivotal in Charles Woodson's transition back in the day with the Raiders from corner to safety. Now, don't get me wrong. Charles Woodson is a legend. He's a Hall of Famer. He was already that, and he had a lot of talent. But Marcus Robertson really helped him with that transition to not falling off when he went to safety, but playing extremely well when he went to safety as well. So here's what Alontae and I talked about. You'll hear my questions, so you also have the full context of what's going on between our conversation. But the first question from me to him was just about the transition and how different it is going from the outside corner spot to the inside in the slot.
It's a big difference, man. I'm talking about I'm out there making mistakes, and I'm kind of hard on myself right now about it because I kind of wish that I could just get it right now, but it's just not happening. So just going to continue to watch tape, ask the coaches the questions, and I have guys helping me out as well. So it's taking one day at a time. It's just second week of OTAs, but I know by the time it really matters, I'll be where I need to be.
What's one of the biggest differences for you while you're on that spot?
The biggest difference?
Yeah, like one of the biggest differences that you're adjusting to.
Really just understanding the fronts, and understanding like where your help's at more. I feel like you have more help in the slot than you do on the outside. So understanding where your help's at, and then really just understanding like fronts and where the linebackers are going to be, when to bump, when not to bump, motion, when not to run with motion, just stuff like that.
What's some of your early impressions on Joe Woods? You mentioned him a little bit earlier.
He's very detailed. He's big on technique, and that's what I like. I think technique is probably the most important thing, especially as a corner. So that, and then him and Coach M-Rob, they work together really well as far as in the meeting room, on the practice field. So far, so good. Like I said, I can't wait for everybody else to get back, though, so we can have a full group together and just see kind of how we work.
What's it like to have, you've got Dennis Allen, you've got Marcus Robertson, you've got Joe Woods. These are all secondary specialty guys. What's it like to have that amount of representation on the coaching staff for your position?
It's huge. They all have been around great players. They all know what it takes to be, like, some of the best like in your position. So it's big. But at the end of the day, I always say, I love playing for Coach DA. Just the swagger that he wants from us. And we talked about swagger last year going into the Raiders game. And you at practice already, and he's like, we need the handshakes, we need like guys dancing, moving around. It's good to play for a coach who lets you be yourself, and just plays hard-nosed defensive football. And Coach Woods has success being a D coordinator, and so just looking forward to what it looks like going into vet camp.
Which makes a ton of sense. You're looking forward to what it's going to be like going into vet camp and when everybody's there and everything, and you go into training camp as well as mini camps, because then he gets to scaffold, right? He gets to add some of that additional experience that he's picking up from the slot and how that helps him out from the outside. You heard a little bit of what it's like in terms of the struggle, or not the struggle, but the challenge of transitioning to the inside and what you have to learn. He mentioned like it's nice to have the extra sort of help because you have so many players that are on your back end there that can have your back. But the run fits, the run responsibilities, things like that are so massively different. And we know how active Alontae Taylor has been in the run game and making plays in the backfield and things like that. That's such a core part of his game. And of course, a big emphasis for the New Orleans Saints. I mean, I didn't do much cornerback scouting this year because I knew that the Saints weren't really going to go after a corner in the draft. It just didn't seem likely. And so I didn't really get to really dive into that position at all over the course of the offseason because I wanted to bring you more on the defensive line, wide receiver, the spots that we kind of knew that they were going to go. I just think that with Alontae, Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, all of these guys, the thing that goes unheralded about them is how much they additionally contribute as run stoppers and as tacklers. They're all solid tacklers. These aren't, he's going to come after me for saying this probably, but these aren't Deion Sanders guys to where, like they don't pay me to tackle, right? They pay me to cover and do this whole thing. For these guys, like they're very aware that they are also paid to go out there and tackle. And it's an unheralded part of their game and kind of an underappreciated part of their game, their ability to be able to contribute as those run stoppers and helping out in the running game and in run support and all of that. So, doing that from the nickel, you're even more in the heat of it all in terms of having to be able to make those quick plays, the running backs getting to you pretty quickly on those off tackle runs and things like that. How do you help support? How do you help not give up the sideline to the runner, keeping the runner in the middle of the field, all those things. And so there's so much difference in terms of the responsibilities from the outside to the inside, not just because of coverage, not just because of navigating traffic and those crossing routes and all the different sort of route tree expansions that you get from slot receivers. It's also what you're able to do or not able to do in some cases by contributing in the run game as well. And even sometimes for the New Orleans Saints as a pass rusher, we've watched them rush the passer with Bradley Roby, with PJ Williams, with the safeties coming out of the slot as well. They did it a ton with CJ Gardner-Johnson. That is another part that he would be asked to do if ever taking those snaps out of the slot or at the nickel position. So those are some of the big things that I think are the massive differences. Sorry, I just kind of blacked out for a minute. I just got to talking about football and I was just blah, 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 blah. But I do think that those are some of the bigger differences that take place and kind of the smaller nuances that take place when you talk about a player transitioning from outside corner to the inside, which is one of the reasons why you'll hear many of us tell you, I don't know if the Saints should rely on the idea of transitioning a corner from the outside to inside because it's so vastly different that you really want a career guy that has played that position in college, that has some experience in the NFL. It's one of the reasons why I love the selection of Jordan Howden. Jordan Howden has like mad experience in the slot during his time or at the nickel during his time with Minnesota. And, that's something that he's ready to do. Smoke Monday, same thing. Bradley Roby, of course, same thing. Bradley Roby learned directly from the guy that kind of helped to invent the, let's say, popularity of the nickel position. He didn't invent the nickel position, but he definitely made it so that, and I'm talking about Chris Harris Jr. Chris Harris Jr., when he was with the Broncos, made the nickel spot something that college athletes looked at and said, I want to play that role, as opposed to it just being all right, you're the third best corner on the roster, so you go there. And, that could be Chris Harris Jr. In some cases, you could have argued he was the best corner on that Denver Broncos defense. I know I just made a big claim there, but at certain games and certain moments and things like that, and he was playing in the slot. And I think that that's true for, a couple of other guys that you could look at and highlight that way as well. Like you look at Mike Hinton, who used to play with the the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was consistently one of the better secondary players, and he was the guy that played in the slot, but he was a career slot guy. Ugo Amadi is a career slot guy. And so, you look at some of these folks that the Saints have on the roster and you go, okay, let the guys that play the position, not necessarily transition. But as we discussed a couple of days ago, there is benefit to Alontae Taylor doing this, because if ever he's tasked with shadowing a receiver that can move to the inside in the slot or out on the perimeter, the more experience he has at nickel, the more he's able to just move around, and the more that Dennis Allen can say, go shut that guy down. And he just follows him wherever he goes. And that's one of the reasons why I think cross-training, learning the slot position a little bit, and you're going to get game planned into those moments sometimes, especially when you're a man coverage team. So you might as well get the reps, get the opportunities there. All right, y'all, coming up on Monday, what are we looking for over on the offensive side when it comes to OTAs, as well as any big news that happens over the weekend? We're all still here actively on Hunter Renfrow watch. It is officially June 2nd, so it is now post-June 1. So could the Raiders be looking to move Hunter Renfrow, and could the Saints be in on that action? Las Vegas, some stores are already selling Hunter Renfrow's jerseys for 25% off. I doubt the stores know something the NFL doesn't, but something really funny around all that. So we'll see how all that goes. Oh, and before we wrap it up here, let me also give a big shout out to Lee, my boy, who said hi over at Parkway. Help me out with the Po' Boys. Appreciate you, Lee. Thanks so much for all of the support. And thank you all for the support, as always, of course, as well. Appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, and of course, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi, and if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up, let me know how the family's doing, let me know how you're living, let me know how you're momming them, and trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.